Day 605, Tuesday, February 18th. Jeremiah 37:11-21, and Jeremiah 38. Jeremiah 37:11-21 NKJV. And it happened, when the army of the Chaldeans left the siege of Jerusalem for fear of Pharaoh's army, that Jeremiah went out of Jerusalem to go into the land of Benjamin to claim his property there among the people. And when he was in the gate of Benjamin, a captain of the guard was there, whose name was Arijah the son of Shelemiah the son of Hananiah. And he seized Jeremiah the prophet, saying, "You are defecting to the Chaldeans." Then Jeremiah said, "False, I am not defecting to the Chaldeans." But he did not listen to him. So Arijah seized Jeremiah and brought him to the princes. Therefore the princes were angry with Jeremiah, and they struck him and put him in prison in the house of Jonathan the scribe, for they had made that the prison. When Jeremiah entered the dungeon and the cells, and Jeremiah had remained there many days, then Zedekiah the king sent and took him out. The king asked him secretly in his house and said, "Is there any word from the Lord?" And Jeremiah said, "There is." Then he said, "You shall be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon." Moreover Jeremiah said to King Zedekiah, "What offense have I committed against you, against your servants, or against this people, that you have put me in prison? Where now are your prophets who prophesied to you, saying, 'The king of Babylon will not come against you or against this land'? Therefore please hear now, O my lord the king. Please, let my petition be accepted before you, and do not make me return to the house of Jonathan the scribe, lest I die there." Then Zedekiah the king commanded that they should commit Jeremiah to the court of the prison, and that they should give him daily a piece of bread from the baker's street, until all the bread in the city was gone. Thus Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. Jeremiah 38:1-28 NKJV. Now Shephatiah the son of Mattan, Gedaliah the son of Pashur, Jukal the son of Shelemiah, and Pashur the son of Malchiah heard the words that Jeremiah had spoken to all the people, saying, "Thus says the Lord, he who remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence, but he who goes over to the Chaldeans shall live. His life shall be as a prize to him, and he shall live. Thus says the Lord, this city shall surely be given into the hand of the king of Babylon's army, which shall take it." Therefore the princes said to the king, "Please, let this man be put to death, for thus he weakens the hands of the men of war who remain in this city, and the hands of all the people, by speaking such words to them. For this man does not seek the welfare of this people, but their harm." Then Zedekiah the king said, "Look, he is in your hand, for the king can do nothing against you." So they took Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah the king's son, which was in the court of the prison. And they let Jeremiah down with ropes. And in the dungeon there was no water but mire, so Jeremiah sank in the mire. Now Ebed-melech the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs who was in the king's house, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the dungeon. When the king was sitting at the gate of Benjamin, Ebed-melech went out of the king's house and spoke to the king, saying, "My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they have cast into the dungeon, and he is likely to die from hunger in the place where he is, for there is no more bread in the city." Then the king commanded Ebed-melech the Ethiopian, saying, "Take from here 30 men with you, and lift Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he dies." So Ebed-melech took the men with him, and went into the house of the king under the treasury, and took from there old clothes and old rags, and let them down by ropes into the dungeon to Jeremiah. Then Ebed-melech the Ethiopian said to Jeremiah, "Please put these old clothes and rags under your armpits, under the ropes." And Jeremiah did so. So they pulled Jeremiah up with ropes and lifted him out of the dungeon. And Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. Then Zedekiah the king sent, and had Jeremiah the prophet brought to him at the third entrance of the house of the Lord. And the king said to Jeremiah, "I will ask you something, hide nothing from me." Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, "If I declare it to you, will you not surely put me to death? And if I give you advice, you will not listen to me." So Zedekiah the king swore secretly to Jeremiah, saying, "As the Lord lives who made our very souls, I will not put you to death, nor will I give you into the hand of these men who seek your life." Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, "Thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, if you surely surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then your soul shall live. This city shall not be burned with fire, and you and your house shall live. But if you do not surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then this city shall be given into the hand of the Chaldeans. They shall burn it with fire, and you shall not escape from their hand." And Zedekiah the king said to Jeremiah, "I am afraid of the Jews who have defected to the Chaldeans, lest they deliver me into their hand, and they abuse me." But Jeremiah said, "They shall not deliver you. Please obey the voice of the Lord which I speak to you. So it shall be well with you, and your soul shall live. But if you refuse to surrender, this is the word that the Lord has shown me. Now behold, All the women who are left in the king of Judah's house shall be surrendered to the king of Babylon's princes. And those women shall say, Your close friends have set upon you and prevailed against you, your feet have sunk in the mire, and they have turned away again. So they shall surrender all your wives and children to the Chaldeans. You shall not escape from their hand, but shall be taken by the hand of the king of Babylon. And you shall cause this city to be burned with fire. Then Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, Let no one know of these words, and you shall not die. But if the princes hear that I have talked with you, and they come to you and say to you, Declare to us now what you have said to the king, and also what the king said to you. Do not hide it from us, and we will not put you to death. Then you shall say to them, I presented my request before the king, that he would not make me return to Jonathan's house to die there. Then all the princes came to Jeremiah and asked him, and he told them according to all these words that the king had commanded. So they stopped speaking with him, for the conversation had not been heard. Now Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison until the day that Jerusalem was taken. And he was there when Jerusalem was taken. Daily Deep Dive. The UCG reading plan states, The temporary lifting of the Babylonian siege from Jerusalem provides an opportunity for some movement outside the city. Jeremiah sets off for the land of Benjamin, presumably for his hometown of Anathoth, just 3 miles outside the capital. 2. As one commentator translates verse 12, attend to a division of property among his people there, QTD. In Expositor's Bible Commentary, footnote on verse 12. The King James translation, to separate himself thence in the midst of the people, is incorrect. The presupposition is that a relative had died in Anathoth, so it was incumbent on Jeremiah to be present in connection with the inheritance, footnote on verse 12. But the prophet is arrested on suspicion of defecting to the Chaldeans by a captain of the guard named Irijah. His grandfather's name is Hananiah, verse 13, possibly, as some have suggested, the false prophet Hananiah who died at Jeremiah's decree from God. See Jeremiah 28. We then come to Jeremiah's imprisonment. It is not entirely clear if our current reading encompasses 2 separate imprisonments or 2 accounts of the same one. Compare Jeremiah 37:1 and reading in 21. Those who argue for 2 imprisonments point out that Jeremiah 7:15 mentions the prophet being cast into prison in the house of Jonathan the scribe, where he is thrown into a dungeon or cistern. Into the dungeon of Malchiah the king's son, or Malchiah son of Hamelech. The argument in favor of 1 imprisonment here is that the 2 accounts are extremely similar and that, at the end of both, Jeremiah requests of the king that he not be returned to Jonathan's house to die. Compare Jeremiah 7:20, Jeremiah 8:26. Indeed, 1 imprisonment seems rather likely, which would mean that the dungeon or cistern of Malchiah was in the house of Jonathan. Easily explainable if ownership had changed, if Malchiah had built the cistern, or if Malchiah was the official in charge of prisoners. Pashur, one of the leaders Jeremiah is arraigned before, who was part of Zedekiah's delegation to Jeremiah at the beginning of the Babylonian siege in chapter 21, is the son of Malchiah, Jeremiah 38:1, perhaps the namesake of the dungeon. With Pashur is Jucal, same verse, the Jehucal of the delegation Zedekiah sent to Jeremiah when the siege was lifted at the beginning of chapter 37. The officials are outraged at Jeremiah's public proclamation of what they consider to be a seditious message, and they call for his execution. Interestingly, Zedekiah declares himself powerless against these leaders, Jeremiah 38:5. He is evidently insecure in his position. Though he had reigned for a decade, it should be recalled that many still consider Jeconiah, a prisoner in Babylon, as the real king. Also, Zedekiah later mentions his fear of pro-Babylonian factions, verse 19. Many were likely blaming Zedekiah for having instigated the Babylonian siege. Now that it had been lifted for a time, a coup was not out of the question. Nevertheless, Zedekiah certainly wielded a great deal of power still. He could have protected God's prophet, but it didn't seem politically expedient to him. The leaders ordered Jeremiah thrown into the prison dungeon, verse 6, or cistern Niv, ostensibly, as they had called for his execution, with the intention of his dying a slow death. The cistern of Palestine was commonly a pear-shaped reservoir, into which water could run from a roof, tunnel, or courtyard. From about the 13th century BC, it was plastered, and its openings stopped by a suitable cut stone, large enough for protection, but sometimes quite heavy, cf. Genesis 29:8-10. In abandoned reservoirs there is usually a mound of debris underneath the opening, consisting of dirt and rubbish blown or knocked in, shattered remnants of water containers, and not infrequently skeletons. These may represent the result of accident, suicide, or some such incarceration as that which Jeremiah endured, although he did not experience the usual fatal end of exhaustion and drowning in water and mud. Cistern. The New International Dictionary of Biblical Archaeology, 1983, p. 129. Jeremiah is rescued through the intervention of Ebed-Melech the Cushite, who convinces the king to have the prophet removed from the cistern. Jeremiah 38:7-10. He takes great care in helping Jeremiah out of his confinement. Verses 11-13. How ironic that a foreigner, a once despised Cushite and eunuch, cared more for the prophet of God than did the king and princes of Jeremiah's own people. Nelson Study Bible, note on verses 11-13. We later learn that this is because he trusts in the God of Israel, and that God will reward him with deliverance from Jerusalem's destruction. 39:15-18. Zedekiah's wavering. Following the rescue is a dialogue between Jeremiah and Zedekiah, wherein we are afforded insight into the king's thinking. The narrative again demonstrates Zedekiah's instability, constantly wavering and giving in to the pressure of those around him. His day-to-day life was one of rebellion against God, yet there still seemed to be an ingrained fear of one of God's servants. Sadly, Zedekiah was like many leaders today, more intent on pleasing people than following the truth. Jeremiah 38:19-20. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus makes this comment about the king. Now as to Zedekiah himself, while he heard the prophet speak, he believed him and agreed to everything as true, and supposed it was for his advantage. But then his friends perverted him, and dissuaded him from what the prophet advised, and obliged him to do what they pleased. Antiquities of the Jews, Book 10, Chap. 7, Sesek. 2. Nations need leaders who are steadfast and not wavering. God also requires the same of his people. Then we will no longer be like children, forever changing our minds about what we believe because someone has told us something different or because someone has cleverly lied to us and made the lie sound like the truth. Instead, we will hold to the truth in love, becoming more and more in every way like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. Ephesians 4:14-15, New Living Translation. Instead of standing fast, Zedekiah will go down in history as having made more U-turns than a learner driver breaking in wild chariot horses. Derek Williams, ed. The Biblical Times, 1997, p. 196. Jeremiah was stirred to his most direct eloquence. And you shall cause this city to be burned with fire. Jeremiah 28:23. This was Zedekiah's last chance to save the city, its walls, its warriors, its women and children. All he had to do was trust the prophet, to lift his head high, take up the flag of truce, walk past the princes, and out to the Chaldean armies. This simple act of contrition could have saved the city. Mastering the Old Testament, Vol. 17, Jeremiah, Lamentations by John Guest, 1988, p. 201. Biblical historian Eugene Merrill writes, Zedekiah was nearly persuaded. Only his pride of position and need to maintain a face of courage in the midst of certain calamity prevented him from acceding to the word of the man, of God. That stubbornness against the truth proved to be the undoing of the king and all his people with him. Kingdom of Priests, A History of Old Testament Israel, 1987, p. 465. Zedekiah could not bring himself to surrender. Jerusalem was to fall. In verses 24-26, Zedekiah commands Jeremiah to not reveal to the other leaders what the two of them had discussed, but to instead say that he had made a request of the king, that he not be put back in the cistern to die. Jeremiah complies. Verse 27. So did Jeremiah lie? No, for he actually did make this request as part of their discussion in Jeremiah 7:20, which argues in favor of the two accounts covering the same episode. While Zedekiah consents to Jeremiah's request that he not be returned to the cistern, the king does not completely free the prophet. Rather, he commits him to the court of the prison, verse Jeremiah 7:21, Jeremiah 8:13, Jeremiah 38, 2008, or courtyard of the guard, Niv, a place near the royal palace where limited mobility was possible, such as in the transaction to purchase the field, mentioned in our next reading. See Jeremiah 32:1-15, Nehemiah 3:25. Nelson Study Bible, note on Jeremiah 37:20-21. The Expositor's Bible Commentary states, the courtyard of the guard, probably a stockade cf. Nehemiah 3:25, was the part of the palace area set apart for prisoners. Friends could visit them there. The soldiers who guarded the palace were quartered there. Note on Jeremiah 32:1-2. Jeremiah will remain in this place until the Babylonians conquer the city. Jeremiah 8:28, Jeremiah 30. End.